Hello and welcome to another episode of the Hockey News Cheat Sheet brought to you by Stix.com. That's Stix.com. I'm George Nassios and I'm joined once again by my co-host Andrew McInnis, who is at the Four Nations final where Connor McDavid scored the OT winner. Quickly, Andrew, how amazing was it to be in the arena for that event?
You asked me before the show started about ranking it in my sports experiences. Number one for me, just a great environment. It was fun being in enemy territory, of course, wearing a Team Canada jersey, being at the Garden. But it just felt like it was written in the script to go to overtime, 2-2 all the way through the third period, goes to overtime. McDavid gets the job done, and it just sets the tone for the Olympics next year. So
Which we'll
really
be
looking
talking
forward to
about
that.
in just a bit. We're going to touch
Yep,
on that in just a bit. So
great time.
good lead into that for sure. We're going to get back to the NHL though. And we're going to look at some future props here. Leon Draisaitl wasn't in the Four Nations tournament because Germany wasn't there. He's now tied with Nathan MacKinnon for the Art Ross Trophy odds at plus 100 as co-favorites. Draisaitl, 87 points in 58 games. MacKinnon, 87 points in 59 games. Who would you rather bet on for the rest of the season?
I think that this doesn't exactly mean that I would prefer this team to have more success, or I think this team will have more success by any means, the player on this team. But I'm gonna lock in Draisaitl. I think he's the guy. I mean, he has had a phenomenal season, and to be quite frank, I actually still believe that they have less depth on the Edmonton Oilers than the Colorado Avalanche do. I think that both teams, you could argue in any given week, this team needs secondary scoring. That team needs secondary scoring. But there's not been very many nights where you've seen a guy like Draisaitl take the night off. And I'm not saying MacKinnon shows up and takes the night off, but with Martin Necas now on the team, with some of these such talented players, with Makar stepping up offensively consistently, and now that the Avalanche have found a good goaltender, something that the analytical numbers will tell us the Edmonton Oilers still don't really have. I think that this is an opportunity for us to bet on an Oilers team that will rely heavily and more upon Draisaitl, I think, than they will on MacKinnon. So he's having a phenomenal year. People talk about the whole Batman, Robin thing, Pippen and Jordan. Forget about that. Draisaitl is special on his own, and I think that he's proven that over this season. He's proven that over the past few years. And I'll tell you, he's proven that, George, since the Four Nations tournament, because, as much as McDavid made us smile as Canadians, he's not really making Oilers fans smile right now with a lot of minuses next to his name since returning.
Couple dash threes in back-to-back games, and Edmonton's lost 3 in a row since the Four Nations.
Yeah, so one guy, like you mentioned, that's focused, that's rested, that wasn't in there was the German himself, Draisaitl. So I'll take him to be the guy for me. What about yourself?
Do you think anybody else will sneak in there? Is maybe something else to ask. Nikita Kucherov's right there. In terms of points per games, he's missed a couple games this year. Like Draisaitl, he also got a break during the Four Nations. He missed the last game before the Four Nations, so he might have had a small knock, and he's probably back to 100% now. It's just it's going to be interesting to see how these guys that had 2 full weeks off during the Four Nations perform the rest of the way compared to the guys that were involved in really taxing games. I mean, for Canada and the US, every game, let's not fool ourselves and think US and Canada were the only tough games of this tournament. Every game was a taxing game for these squads. Sure, the US kind of ran away with the game against Finland, but that was 2-1 going into the third period. So do you think guys like Kucherov and Draisaitl have the edge over MacKinnon because MacKinnon went through some like 4 extra battles there?
I think they do. There was a huge speculation regarding how important were these games to these players, right? Everybody was kind of debating it. I got into it with a reporter from Winnipeg saying some of these players have said this is the biggest game of their lives.
Absolutely.
And it was only a quote unquote exhibition all-star, right? But everyone said it might not have been the biggest game they've played in their lives. It was the most emotional game they've played in their lives. And a lot of them could probably agree with that. Even the guys that have won the Stanley Cup, just with everything going on, how much Canada was getting behind the team. So I certainly agree with you. Obviously, looking at things right now, it's pretty much MacKinnon, Draisaitl, and then Kucherov right behind there. And then, of course, you have McDavid and Marner that are kind of the other guys on that list in the top 5. But I think Kucherov's definitely worth it. And would you argue, George, that Tampa Bay still remains kind of undervalued in the marketplace? I've been talking about them all year long on the cheat sheet, and I think that this team has a pretty good schedule moving forward. Kucherov could certainly be a guy. And again, as you mentioned, he wasn't at this tournament, so it definitely could benefit him and the Tampa Bay Lightning.
Yeah, I just think Tampa, if we're going to talk about teams relying on their top guys, I don't think any team in the league relies on their top guys more than Tampa. And Kucherov seems to be all in and all the activity on, regardless who's scoring, whether it's Point, Gensel, Hagel. Kucherov always seems to find an apple there, and he can do it himself. So
underrated
something worth watching. Just going to point out, I know he's far back. McDavid is 5.5 to 1 right now. Okay. 5.5 to 1 to win the scoring title. So don't ever rule out Connor McDavid. But from an Oilers team that's struggling that we discussed to another Canadian team that's kind of rolling since the break with 3 straight wins, the Maple Leafs. And Marner and Matthews really didn't do anything the first 2 games. Marner had a great game the other night against the Bruins, scoring 2 goals, including the OT winner. But the Leafs have reclaimed top spot in the Atlantic and are the favorites at plus 110 to win the division. The Panthers just 1 point behind them and are sitting at plus 150. But with the news that, and we saw Matthew Tkachuk couldn't really go to play too many minutes in that final game against Canada, he could be out long term. Is this the year that the Maple Leafs claim the division, and is it time to jump on them to win it right now?
I remember I said to you like 4 weeks ago, it just pains me inside. It hurts me. It hurts me inside to say anything good about this Leafs team. But it's so important for them to finally win this division, to claim themselves as the top dog in the Atlantic. And the funny thing is sure, there's been times where I've said, hey, they're relying on goaltending. Hey, this guy's doing this. I have to sit here and officially say that they have gotten a little bit more secondary scoring lately. It has popped up. And, for all the Leafs fans going after Max Domi for his lack of production, he's doing everything he can besides score. I mean, he is creating chances. He is passing the puck, and he's a guy that will be there for you in the postseason. But I think this team's going to make moves. They're going to be active in the precise way. They don't want to change their roster too much. And when you look at the Florida Panthers, they sort of remind me of the Tampa Bay Lightning. Obviously both those teams in Florida have had a ton of success. At this point, George, for Florida, I think it's more of a just get in and see what happens. Get to the postseason. You know what to do once you're there. Whereas this Leafs team, I think, will be dialed in. They've dealt with so many injuries. I saw today, Marner not at practice, Matthews not there, Nylander, so many of these players, they're just taking a load management rest day. And it's not load management like the NBA where they actually skip a real game. They're just skipping practice, like Allen Iverson would say. This is a team that means business, and I hate to say it, the Maple Leafs will win the division this year.
Yeah, they did get a scare against Boston when Chris Tanev left the game with an apparent arm injury after playing, I think, less than a minute. But it seems like they're getting some good news. As Berube said, it was probably not going to be long-term, but he will miss the game Friday against the Rangers. Whereas where we talked about with Florida, I believe Paul Maurice did say, don't worry, he will be back like in time for the playoffs, but that's not necessarily reassuring when that means he could be out for a month or a month and a half leading up to that. And he is the heartbeat of that team. So the Leafs do look like the good bet to make to win the Atlantic division.
And I have to say, because they made me lose, because I bet against the Leafs on Tuesday night, for them to have comebacks like they have been lately. That's a big thing with this Leafs team because they have been such a good team. I think that their record, what do they only have? Like 2 losses, I think, on the year when they go into the third period with the lead. But to go into the third period down multiple goals against the Boston Bruins and to come out with that win in overtime, this team is showing a different level of resiliency. And it's almost like the passing of the guard. Like the Bruins might miss the playoffs this year, and we're going to get the Leafs finishing first in the division. What's going on? What world am I living in right now?
Yeah, well, you heard it here first on the Hockey News cheat sheet. Andrew loves the Leafs to win the Atlantic division. Andrew loves the Leafs.
Not 2 rounds in the playoffs, though, just the division.
We'll see. Going back to the Four Nations and moving on to the Olympics, it was an amazing finish to the Four Nations face-off. Canada has opened as way too early favorites. at plus 175 over USA at plus 190 to win the gold medal at the 2026 Olympics in Italy. Based on the age and trajectory of both rosters, who do you think will be better equipped to win gold at the Olympics?
Well, look, I think that it was very close. And many people will say no Charlie McAvoy for the championship game, no Cale Makar for that first meeting in Montreal. And of course, no Quinn Hughes at the tournament, but also no Shea Theodore, no Alex Pietrangelo. Some people say, hey, look, maybe we'll have different goalies. Maybe we'll have different guys. I think the biggest factor with this is that the Olympics is going to be held on international ice. It's going to be held in a bigger ice surface. So the whole physicality of the game, and a lot of people are talking about this right now. I heard some podcasts saying, the IIHF should let these guys play under NHL rules. We're not going to see 2 stage fights off the draw like we saw in the Four Nations. We're just not going to see it. So
no, we won't. I'd love to, but we won't.
Yes, and that's the thing is that, look, as much as Canada would pride ourselves off of being a tough country as far as hockey and the grinded out type of game, it's very clear right now that Canada is kind of the skillful team, and the Americans are playing that hard-nosed, score the goals in the blue paint. If you look in the championship game, the 2 goals the Team USA scored from Brady Tkachuk and Jake Sanderson, those were from about 4 or 5 feet away from the net off juicy rebounds. Those are the goals they're scoring.
Great plays by Austin Matthews to facilitate.
Absolutely, yes. See that, and I think that the open ice though benefits Canada, and I do think that if we start seeing some of those younger players, let's say a Bedard, let's say a Celebrini, or even from my Montreal Canadiens, Nick Suzuki welcomes himself on the Team Canada. The physicality might not be good for those players, but if there's more open ice, it benefits them. So I think that this international ice surface in the Olympics does benefit Team Canada. But hey, I will say I'd love to see Quinn Hughes out there in the open ice and 2 fully healthy rosters. But I think that Team USA at many books were the favorites in the Four Nations. I think that Team Canada, rightfully so, are the favorites to win the Olympic gold.
Yeah, I think just the winning pedigree of them taking the Four Nations face-off means something as well in that aspect. I still do think, looking at these rosters and looking forward, that the U.S. has the better roster. I think Canada's got the edge, obviously, in top-end talent. But I will just point this out to bettors, something to watch for. The NHL players went to 5 Olympics between 98 and 2014. 2 of those were in North America, 2002 in Salt Lake and 2010 in Vancouver. Canada won both of those. The North American team won both of those. The other 3 were in Nagano, Japan, Italy, I believe, in 2006, and in 2014. I believe it was in Europe, but it was in Sochi, Russia. So in those 3 tournaments, 2 European teams won, the Czech Republic and Sweden. And Canada won the last one in 2014 with just a very dominant team. But it might be worth considering on this bigger ice surface that you mentioned, away from North America, that a team like a Sweden or a Russia, if they're allowed to play, that wins this tournament. So it might be worth looking at another team other than Canada and USA. In 2006, Canada and USA didn't even medal, I don't believe. Canada definitely didn't. And I don't think the USA did either. So might be worth taking a look at a longer shot team, since this tournament is going to be played in Italy and not in North America. But we're going to head back to the NHL now, talking about a few players that we all hope to see in the Olympics next year. All Canadian and Americans, Norris Trophy odds have flipped between Cale Makar and Quinn Hughes all season. Quinn Hughes nursing a bit of an injury and has missed quite a few games now. But should bettors consider putting money on Zach Werenski at plus 440? He has 62 points, 56 games played, so 2 points behind Makar with 2 games in hand. And if the Blue Jackets make the playoffs, isn't there a case for him to win this award?
Yeah, I would say don't look now, but do you want to place any bets on any player that plays on the Vancouver Canucks? I wouldn't want to place a single thing on anything to do with those guys. I think you want teams that are kind of playing with swag, playing with momentum, and that's the Columbus Blue Jackets. That's a team that's putting up goals. When they win games, they put up numbers. When they lose games, even, George, they're putting up numbers. This is a team that if I was to sit at home and there were a couple teams playing that I don't usually watch, but there was all out of market games, I would be inclined to watch the Columbus Blue Jackets. I'd actually
Wow.
rather
I don't
watch
think
the
I've
Blue
ever
Jackets.
heard a human being outside of Columbus say that before.
Yeah. And I would rather watch them right now than watch the Vancouver Canucks, because Elias Pettersson's sitting at home saying, wow, I wonder if the fans are thinking that they should have traded me instead of JT Miller, because that team is not doing well. So I always say that, sure, you can put up numbers on a bad team as a forward, maybe, but as a defenseman, think about how much time Quinn Hughes is even going to spend in the O zone. He's going to be spending so much time in the D zone as an actual defenseman. Can't jump into the rush. But for Columbus and for a guy like Werenski, I feel like he certainly can. And then Cale Makar, he's just an absolute weapon on both ends of the ice. But I think, for the Avalanche, a lot of it depends on the kind of games that they're playing in, because I do think that since they acquired Blackwood, they have become more comfortable in low-scoring games. I mean, even we saw them lose a 3-1 the other day, and in games that they win these days, they have been winning in lower-scoring fashion. So I think for the Columbus Blue Jackets and the price we're getting right now in Werenski, I think it's worth a buy. I do. And I'll be the first one to say, it sounds intriguing, but I'll have to pass. I think this is worth a buy here.
Yeah, I think the one thing with Cale Makar, when you look at Quinn Hughes and Zach Werenski, Colorado, I mean, unless something unheard of happens, they're pretty safe in making the playoffs. So it's going to be tough for Quinn Hughes or Zach Werenski to win the award if their teams don't make the playoffs. Columbus is in a playoff spot right now. They have the final wild card spot in the Eastern Conference. Can they keep it going to the end? I think that's the only question. If Columbus makes the playoffs and Werenski and Makar keep on producing at their current pace, this should 100% be Zach Werenski's award. I mean, if they make the playoffs, Zach Werenski should get votes for the Hart Trophy, in my opinion, because sure, they've had guys step up, but he is carrying that team. He was also the leading scorer at the Four Nations with 6 points. So if this guy's team makes the playoffs, if you think that they are going to make the playoffs, I would 100% put money on Zach Werenski. If you're debating it, I still think it's worth the bet at those odds. So I think this is definitely a good bet to make. We're going to move over to your favorite corner of the room, Andrew, the fantasy corner. And there's been some trade chatter surrounding goalie John Gibson on Anaheim. Lucas Dostos proven himself to be a pretty reliable goaltender over there. John Gibson's kind of been in the rumor mill for what seems like forever now, with his preferred destinations being Carolina or Edmonton, apparently. Is this a good time for fantasy owners to trade for Gibson? He has been the subject of trade rumors for a long time, like I said, but nothing has come to fruition.
I kind of look at this as somebody kind of getting a raise at work like a year before they're about to retire. You can't let this person finally get the achievement that they deserve once they're too old to actually kind of appreciate and get valued and be able to, put that achievement to work. And that's how I feel about this. John Gibson should have been moved 5 years ago. John Gibson shouldn't even still be on that team. I mean, we're going to talk about adding him to our fantasy rosters here. You better talk about adding him to the closest retirement home down the street from where you live. Whoa. I mean, to me right now, John Gibson isn't a guy that I want to add to my list, because I think that the guy he was a few years ago isn't the same guy who he is right now. And I'm not just saying that. And I still think he's a good player. And obviously he does play on the Anaheim Ducks, but Lucas Dostal, look at the way he's looked in net. I mean, how many times he's faced like 45 shots, 40 shots some nights, and had some really rock solid performances. It feels to me like we've heard about Gibson trade rumors over the past 3 years, and now they're saying, okay, guys, what will everybody give us for him? We'll finally offer you. And I just don't think it's worth it at this time. I'm curious to see which teams will be desperate enough. You mentioned Carolina, you mentioned Edmonton. I don't know if those teams will take it. Then again, I could be proven wrong. He could go on a good team. Some players get just absolutely rejuvenized by playing on a better roster. But I just think it's too little too late for that guy to kind of go and play on a good team. I don't mean to be too harsh here, George, but I just think that should have been something that was done probably 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, perhaps. Well, that's a long time ago. I don't know if he was available, but he was definitely available the last few years. I don't know. When I look at Edmonton, Stuart Skinner just looks shaky to me. I don't even know if he's the best goalie on the Oilers team right now, to be honest. So Carolina, I think they figure out a way, and it also depends on the asking price. But I think if you're trading for him, if he's getting traded and you're a Carolina or Edmonton, he's going to get the games in net and he's going to get more wins. And I think there is a case to be made that he does get rejuvenated somewhat. So, but it might be much ado about nothing again, but I think it's definitely time, unless they want Gibson to be a Duck for life and be a backup at 6.4 million for another year or two or whatever he's got on his contract. It's definitely time for them to move on and get what they can. I'm not sure what the asking price is going to be, but it's going to be interesting to follow nonetheless. We talked about Zach Werenski before in the Columbus Blue Jackets, and they just got a boost this week. Boone Jenner just made his return to the lineup, got 2 games in after undergoing shoulder surgery. Do we think Jenner, like talking about the fantasy corner, do we think Jenner will be slotted back into the top 6 here consistently? Columbus, like you mentioned, lots of goal scoring, top 10 goal scoring offense, making Jenner a potentially good fantasy addition.
Yeah, I'm taking a look at things right now. They have him slotted in as the second line left winger with Cole Sillinger and Kent Johnson. So Voronkov, Fantilli, and Marchenko. That top 6 is quietly kind of dangerous. I like it.
It's an interesting top 6.
The thing about Boone Jenner is he's not gonna score the most highlight goals, but he's gonna always play along the boards, always play tough, and always make the right play. And when we talk about health, we talk about rest. I mean, obviously he wasn't off because of rest. He was off because of health issues and injury. But man, this guy's got to be fired up. And I feel like he's going to do everything he can to find his teammates. And to be with Kent Johnson and Cole Sillinger, 2 shooters, I feel like he belongs in that top 6 position. I wouldn't mind. I'll probably find myself adding him to some fantasy teams. I'll probably find myself looking at the prop market with a guy like Boone Jenner. Because again, win or lose, this Blue Jackets team right now is scoring goals. So if they're doing this without some of their better players, imagine when they get fully healthy.
Yeah, and he's got to be excited to spend so many years with this Columbus squad, most of the years not making the playoffs. So he's got to be excited given the position they're in right now and given the expectations, especially at the start of the year. Columbus has far exceeded them. So I do see some production for him moving forward. So maybe they've definitely somebody else to target. One player who's able to pick up right where they left off is Kevin Fiala. 7 goals and 2 assists in his last 6 games. He had a really slow start to the season compared to his production the last couple of years. Should Fiala be a fantasy trade target for those who are lacking scoring, or is this just a hot streak right now?
Well, see, my issue with this, I gave it a lot of thought. My issue with this is that I've been watching a lot more LA Kings games lately, and they're fun to watch, George, but you have to really be able to enjoy 2-1 hockey games. That's the problem, right? I mean, their game against the Golden Knights the other night, I think it was like 2-1 for the longest time. And then just like in a matter of minutes, we saw a couple goals break out for the LA Kings. But there's not a team in the league. It used to be Carolina. Then it was New York Islanders. Not a team in the league that I feel the most comfortable with if I'm betting on them and they have a 1-goal lead. That's the LA Kings. So that's the problem, is that you talk about, is it just potentially a streak here? Fiala is a great player, and he gets a ton of shots on goal. He has the green light to shoot the puck whenever he gets it on his stick. But that's the issue I have when it comes to point production, fantasy stuff here with LA Kings players, is you could tell me that they've only scored 9 goals their last 3 games. They very well could be 3-0 in those 3 games versus many other teams need to score 3, 4, or 5 goals to win a game. So it's tough, but also says a lot about how great of a team this Kings team is defensively.
Yeah, definitely a guy to watch out for, and he's definitely red hot right now. Okay, moving on. Who are best fantasy ads in your opinion for this week?
Okay, so I've talked about this guy before, but I'm going to mention him again. I think Capo Caco is a guy that we all have to be paying attention to. Like, I don't know what people see when they see change of scenery and they're talking about how it can really benefit a player. But that whole expression, change of scenery, has absolutely benefited this guy more than anybody else. It has been great for him playing top 6 minutes, playing on the power play, holding on to possession. It's been really impressive. And the next guy I wanted to mention, I was talking to you and our producer, Eric, before the show started. I think that San Jose is fun to watch. Everyone talks about Celebrini. How about we start adding Will Smith to our rosters? Because this is a guy these two guys are two peas in a pod. They work well together. They have fun together. They're friends off ice, friends on the ice. And he doesn't get nearly enough attention from fantasy owners, fantasy perspective, because obviously Sal Brainy is the one with all the flashy plays. Will Smith, I think, is certainly someone that deserves a little bit of credit when it comes to fantasy recognition.
Yeah, I think maybe that's somebody to watch out for long term as a keeper in your fantasy leagues as well. The Sharks obviously traded Mikael Granlund to the Stars, so maybe he gets some more playing time in San Jose now. Celebrini, out of the young guys, Celebrini and William Eklund have kind of already proven themselves. Now it's time for Will Smith to take the next step. We talk about Kako. Seattle's just a weird team for me. They're just a weird, very weird team for me. I feel like they can play 4 games in a week and score 4 goals in the 4 games. So, but he has produced since being traded there. It's just a weird team to watch. Which players are you looking to drop this week?
Okay, I know this might sound a little bit crazy, so bear with me a little bit. Bear with me
I'm
here.
anxious to hear it.
Well, I'm not trying to kind of, drop a bomb here, but I think that a guy like Mika Zibanejad had really been kind of benefiting off JT Miller. But I think that a guy like JT Miller is going to be kind of taking over that line. So when you look at the New York Rangers and their production right now, and you look across the league at all the players you can have on your team, the players you can look at the fantasy wire and pick up, Zibanejad's not a guy I want on my team anymore. He's too inconsistent. He relies on other players to carry the play. He's pretty much a one-timer in his office kind of player right now, and JT Miller seems to be the guy that's driving the play more than he is. So if you can make a trade, if you can find some room on your roster, I feel like that's that's my hot take of the day, that Zibanejad is one of those Rangers that's slowing down. And we're going to stick with another New York team and a guy that I'm not sure if you saw all the memes online about this guy looking like he
But
played.
that he looks like he was 70 years old.
Yeah, Brock Nelson. I mean, this is a guy we have to drop as well because the Islanders
Really?
again. I think
we know at the top of most trade lists is Brock Nelson. It seems like the Islanders are going nowhere on an extension with him.
yeah,
So he's likely getting traded to a contender in the next week. So even taking all that into account, you still think he's the guy to drop?
because I think he's valued for not just what he brings offensively. That's the thing. Of course, if you told me tomorrow, hey, he just got
30 goal
traded
guy in a few of the past years, though, no?
Of course. But I think that, he wasn't on Team USA to score, was he? I
He
think he was
wasn't,
on.
but that's Team USA.
Yeah.
No team in the NHL is Team USA. I'm gonna say this. I'm more surprised that you say drop Brock Nelson than probably Mika Zibanejad,
Okay.
given the situation they're both in, and given that I think Brock Nelson's going to be wearing a new jersey in a couple weeks. Not New Jersey Devil jersey. I mean, a different team's jersey.
The deadline should be good this year. It's always overhyped. A lot of times we see these trades happen before the actual deadline day. But I'm very curious to see. And from a fantasy perspective, it is kind of cool to see if you can pick up some of these players on teams that you think might get moved away, might get traded away, because some of these players are going to get moved. And so instead of maybe picking up a guy like Brock Nelson, I'm talking about more so, what if we add somebody that we think might fill his role on the New York Islanders? Kind of looking at it that way, because if he leaves, someone's got to take his spot on that Islanders team.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's something to watch for. So those are your 2 drops to make this week. Mika Zibanejad, 2 seasoned veterans, Mika Zibanejad and Brock Nelson. All right, thanks once again, Andrew. This has been another episode of the Hockey News Cheat Sheet brought to you by Stix.com. That's STIX.com.